previous podcast, I dealt with the fine-tuning problem, the almost infinite unlikelihood of the initial conditions of the cosmos at the time of the Big Bang. I also looked at the unlikelihood of the subsequent evolution of complexity from the creation of the first elements to biogenesis and finally to the emergence of cognitive consciousness. I looked at the Fermi paradox, the disturbing probability that as far as we are ever likely to be aware, we may be alone in the cosmos. I considered the possibility that consciousness may be a central and indispensable factor in the genesis and evolution of the great cosmic algorithm. In this episode, I would like to examine the very slow emergence of consciousness on Earth and why it may be central to the whole process of creation. Consciousness is emergent from and central to the evolution of complexity. In the second podcast, I postulated that the information in complex systems exists in algorithms and fractals unfolding according to the laws of physics. In this podcast, I shall argue that this information complexity becomes real only when it is perceived by a consciousness and intelligible only when it is understood by a cognitive consciousness. It is impossible to conceive of anything without consciousness. Indeed, even the attempt to imagine a cosmos without consciousness requires an advanced consciousness. Cogito, ergo omnia sunt. I think, therefore, everything exists. It is also impossible to think of consciousness without information. Both consciousness and complexity information arising from the cosmological algorithm come into reality in the process of perception and comprehension. Consciousness is the emergent self-awareness and self-understanding of the cosmological algorithm. It brings the cosmos into meaningful existence, into cognitive reality. The trajectory of creation would accordingly appear to be the emergence and evolution of complexity, resulting in biogenesis, consciousness, our own cognitive consciousness, and culminating ultimately, we may conjecture, in general superintelligent consciousness. Consciousness developed from the assimilation of information from the environment of organisms and the internal processing and response to the assimilated information. It expanded with the evolution of senses that enabled organisms to perceive the environments within which they operated, and neural systems to process and respond to the information received from their senses. In lower organisms, bacteria, single-celled organisms, insects, crustaceans, consciousness was elementary, instinctual and automatic, and little different from machines capable of detecting light, heat and sound. Nevertheless, each primitive consciousness constituted a tiny universe. Consciousness expanded further with the first perception of light by primitive plants turning toward the sun. light perception turned out to be a major survival advantage for early plants and organisms, and with the passage of time led to the independent development of eyes on more than 60 occasions. The next steps were the perception of shape and colour. A giant leap forward was the ability to perceive motion, made possible by the development of short-term memory. Time began with the perception and memory of motion. The ability to see motion proved to be an essential survival mechanism in hunting or escaping from being hunted. Another important advance was the evolution of longer-term memory, which enabled species to organize experience into predictive patterns. Organisms were able to learn from experience, thus avoiding threats and taking advantage of opportunities. The level of consciousness and the content of emerging universes depended entirely on the nature, complexity, and capacity of the senses and neural systems of the insects and animals involved. Higher animals evolved extraordinarily complex brains, including billions of interconnected neurons. Their brains managed the activities of trillions of cells comprising their bodies and collated information from their senses to organize their perceptions of and reactions to the environments in which they operated. The universes they construct are organized according to the instincts with which they are born. This is their software, their operating system. Higher animals' perception of the world is based on their instincts to survive immediate threats, their instinct to obtain the food, water, and other resources necessary for long-term survival, the instinct to compete for territory and for mates, the instinct to mate, and in many species to care for their young and their pack, and the instinct to cultivate complex relationships in social animals. In most species, these inherited instincts also include complex behavioral programs, such as the dances performed by bees, indicating to other bees the location of nectar-bearing flowers, the instructions necessary for the building of complex nests by golden weavers, and the perplexing compulsion of emperor penguins to huddle together in the bitterly cold Antarctic winter. Why not winter instead in the Falkland Islands or Patagonia? In the absence of language, higher animals develop worldviews arising from these basic instincts. Predators, fire, the unknown represent danger. Grasslands, trees, and water relate to the gratification of hunger and thirst. The scent of females in season fires their instincts to mate. The images and scents of competitor males spur them to fight for mates, territory, and status in the herd or pack. They process information in dreams populated by symbols arising from their instincts. In this manner, higher animals, such as dogs and apes, create complex universes characterized by the full range of their instinctive and social experience. They are capable of genuine sorrow and elation. However, without language, there can be little comprehension of the nature of the universes they inhabit, or complex communication beyond a small range of special cries and visual and olfactory signals. there can be very little accumulation and transmission of intergenerational knowledge. The absence of language-based cognition is not necessarily a reflection on the intelligence of higher animals. They learn from experience, and dogs, apes, and some bird species can do complex tasks. There are many wise old dogs. However, in the absence of language and access to external reservoirs of cultural knowledge, the life stories of higher animals are limited to replicating the struggle for survival, procreation, and ascendancy in competition. There is no history beyond the limits of individual memories, and very limited anticipation of the future beyond the next hunt or migration. There is also very limited agency. Even the most developed higher animals have little ability to move beyond their inherited instinctual programs and acquired experience to avoid threats or to take advantage of opportunities. What do elephants think of the stars, the moon, and the rising and setting sun? They may perhaps use them to measure the passing seasons or to navigate. They may take pleasure in the warmth of the sun, the refreshing coolness of bathing in a river, or scratching their backs against an acacia tree. But do they wonder what they are? It is very difficult to do so in the absence of language, and it is impossible to think cognitively if there are no nouns, no adjectives, no adverbs, and no verbs. In my next podcast, I shall examine the emergence and nature of cognitive consciousness and how it enables us to create our universes through language.